Hello and welcome to the Library of Things We Forgot to Remember at 44 Stanley in Johannesburg. My name is Lebohang Mojapelo and I have two amazing guests here. We're going to have a conversation about an installation that they have in this space. I have Masimba Hwati and Michael Gould. I'm excited to have both of them here because they have a project that they are presenting here in Johannesburg in connection with the Library of Things We Forgot to Remember. Just to remind you a bit about the space that we have here. The library is the brainchild of Zimbabwean artist Kudzanai Chiurai, and it's a collection of mainly vinyls from his personal collection over the years, most of them from Zimbabwe, Southern Africa, the continent itself, and the diaspora. Music, speeches, poetry, and he reminds us that there are many elements of our history that are held in these records that need to be told, that people need to remember. And within this archive, it is living and breathing. It is a space that people can come into, pick an album, pick a vinyl, sit down and listen to it, and have memories of either their childhood, remember history of South Africa, of Zimbabwe, of our continent. It is a very important space for us to archive the things that we need to remember from the narratives of history and colonial history that we don't have access to anymore. I'm excited to have these two here because they also have a project which is a sonic experience titled Nyami Nyami. Now, I think from what I remember of Nyami Nyami growing up in Zimbabwe is that he was a river god from the Zambezi, from the Tonga people who owned that land and that space. But in the 1950s, the colonial government of Rhodesia decided to build a dam on the Zambezi. And in the building of this dam, a lot of people died because of the process. And it was an interruption of the flow of that river. It was an interruption of the culture of that space. It was an interruption of the lives of generations of the people who lived there. It caused for many people to die. And it was said that Nyami Nyami, the river god, was fighting, which is why it took over 6 years to build that dam. And there was a lot of destruction, a lot of displacement of the Tonga people. And it is not a good part of our history, if we can say, but a very colonial impression that we know that happened across the continent and across the world. Can you tell me more about your collective, the Zebra Collective? And then maybe perhaps begin to unpack where the idea of the installation came from, the type of art it is, and how you guys came together to create it.
Right. Thank you, Lebo. Thank you for having us. And thank you to the library. So maybe let me begin by the collective. So we are called Zebra Collective. And we met in Michigan. Mike introduced me to a piece called World Without Ice, which he will talk about in a minute. So this piece was about ecological change, climate change, and the role of our role in that, in this time that we call the Anthropocene. And I was thinking, the same thing, but in a different context, because I'm from Zimbabwe and I noticed, and I've been doing research on the impact of the Kariba Dam on the ecology, on the culture of the people, on community relations for a long time. But the dam, the Kariba Dam, is something we grew up knowing as a holiday resort, just as you said. But we never critically explored the story of why was it built, what was the impact. And as you mentioned before, Nyami Nyami became a symbol of resistance against the dam. Not only human resistance and not only organized resistance, but it seemed as if nature itself was against the idea. So there are so many levels of resistance that we can talk about, even the spiritual aspect of it. So our project came here to Johannesburg to explore poetically those ideas, thinking of Nyami Nyami as this symbol and as something that we can also use as a lens to think about our role in this Anthropocene, the time when the human activity has caused a lot of damage to culture, but also to the ecology. So Mike would talk about a world without ice, and then we will build from there how we came to Nyami Nyami.
Yeah, thanks, Masimba. Yeah, so 10 years ago, I was introduced to a geologist. His name's Henry Pollack, and since I'm from the United States, he was the chief science officer for Al Gore, who does a lot with climate change and was the vice president. And he wrote a book called A World Without Ice, which for the last 40 years, he's been going to the Arctic and the Antarctic, taking pictures and doing research. And we were paired together with another professor, a friend of mine, to create a project that translates the difficulty and the difficulty of translating science for everybody. So because he's trying to do very complicated research, his philosophy was like, let's try to take that complications to everybody by creating more of an art installation project. And so we took his book, and he has a bunch of data in there, and we translated that data into music, to a musical score. And then for me, the fun part was, how do I take what is ice and sonify ice? I mean, if you take a big chunk of ice and you look at it, it's pretty boring. It just sits there, and then after a long period of time, it starts to drip. So I watched ice literally melt, and then I wanted to make it louder, so then I put a drum underneath it. So I'm a drummer. That's what I teach at the University of Michigan. And then the drips were making this beautiful sound, and then as it got more and more melted, it started forming these streams, and then the streams sort of overflowed onto the drums. And this began this long 10-year process of creating this installation called The World Without Ice. When I saw Masimba's work, he was trying to sonify different objects, and it was just a perfect symbiosis between what I had been doing and what he's doing to create this kind of collective together. So now instead of ice, the thematic material is the Kariba Dam, but specifically Nyami Nyami. And so for me, it's really a new challenge to try to figure out what kind of sonic palette we can use and how can we perform live and what kind of visual elements, because in my artwork, I used I'm a drummer, so I use all the parts and pieces of drums as visual art. And Masimba, what's great about him is he uses all these old instruments and he creates these beautiful sculptures. So it's a perfect coming together of things in our current project, Nyami Nyami. So I could talk about the project a little bit if you want, like as far as the different elements, but we use drum heads, we use cymbals, we use emergency blankets.
So just, so we're coming from talking about Nyami Nyami as a symbol of resistance, and the Kariba Dam space and project is this also a symbol of colonial imperialist invasion, but also at the same time, you are taking data from something about climate change, the ecological space, and of course, which is in relation to the same thing, that we have done so much damage because of the kind of imperialist and industrial nature of the way we've invaded the world. So I'm just also thinking about this space of like, we have all of this, it's a sonic experience in that sense. We have sound, and we're using sound to remember the sounds of resistance, of the, sort of like many generational fights for land, for freedom. And there is this element of sound. What is the importance of sound? How can sound resist? How can sound tell a story? How can sound present a narrative that adequately represents the story, or maybe inadequately as well?
I have one thing, and then I know Masimba's going to eloquently talk, but all the records in the library here, a record is literally a recording in time. It is a snapshot of what's happening during that time, and so each one of these final records is its own little chapter about what's going on politically, what's going on socially, and for me, I'm extremely sensitive to sound. That's my whole life. I listen for a living. Yeah. And so we're very empathetic towards sound and like towards the vibrations that are happening currently and the space that we inhabit. And so for me, it's being very sensitive to like gaining the knowledge about what's going on. I'm not an expert in South African politics. I don't claim to be an expert in any of that, but just knowing about the dam itself and even currently what's going on, like for example, it's not in very good shape, and so it's in a precarious spot, and we're in a precarious spot with climate, and so what we're doing is just trying to capture we're trying to use those themes to capture the moment now, like the moment, what's happening, and we want people to come in and inhabit the space and create their own picture, their own chapter. Okay, so they can do self-reflection about what's happening not only in Zimbabwe and South Africa and the Kariba Dam, but what's happening globally, and why we're in this like very important time in which we need to make some serious decisions, and about how we, on a micro scale, are impacting our own microclimate. And so it just gives a moment of reflection, and it's not slanted one way or the other. It's an open space for people to really listen and look and try to form their own kind of opinions, and maybe their own mythology or story behind Nyami Nyami.
And the question of sound is a big one. We will not go deep down that rabbit hole, but I'm currently writing a book called Chiurai, Sonic Philosophies. It looks at how my ancestors treated sound, or how they engaged with the idea of sound. And you will be familiar with this in your culture, that sound is not only what you hear. Sound is what you feel. Sound is what is beyond what you feel. Sound is how the earth speaks to the people. Sound is how elsewheres communicate with now. So it's a broad thing. So when you ask the question of what does resistance have to do with sound, it's a beautiful question, because now we are in a place that is a library of sounds that are captured in time. Mm-hmm. And just think of 1985 in summer at a football match in a stadium somewhere, and you are eating an ice cream with your dad, and you hear Thomas Mapfumo record, and you hear another Brenda Fassie playing maybe 5 yards away from you. So that is a picture, a small picture of history. And when I'm here, I hear a record. What is activated is exactly that moment. But not only that, the connections of that moment to other moments. And it goes so deep into deep time, into ancestral time, into whatever you want, wherever you want it to go. But the name of this place also is interesting. because it's about memory. It's about remembering the things that we forgot to remember. It's also funny that Mike has a piece called Remember Me, which he will talk about. So in our work, memory plays a big part. And memory is not only what we remember from the past, because you would know this, that in the philosophy of the people of Southern Africa, time is not as linear. So when you are remembering something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's from the past. You can remember from the future. You can remember from things that are around you. And Ngugi has an interesting definition of remembering. He hyphenates the word.
The RE and the...
So remembering also becomes this process of putting members together, structuring knowledge. So what we are doing also has a lot to do with memory, and even personal memory. Objects that I use here have connections to my own personal memory. Mike has objects in there that connect to his own personal memory. So we come from that personal place of remembering, but we also open it up to, okay, what is the bigger picture of remembering? So I'll give you a small example of what my sister and I would do growing up listening to vinyls. So first of all, we'd take the vinyl out of the packet and smell it, And so there are other senses involved in listening. You are smelling, we are touching it, and also we are projecting ourselves, We had album covers from all over the world, where you had, let's say, for example, Sandra, okay? And you had these otherworldly pictures. So we are sitting there, we are projecting ourselves into that world, listening, sensing, smelling, everything is happening. So sound plays a big part in remembering and also in resistance. And we would literally play the records and imagine ourselves. For example, there's a record here, Manu Dibango, I think it's called Mboa. We were in Cameroon when we were listening to that record, walking in the streets of Cameroon and smelling expensive cigars and wine in an overcrowded room. This was our imagination. We were thinking, we were there. So our project comes also from a personal place. We are not just holding on to a theme that's ecological, but we are saying, what is our stake in this? What is our skin? We are involved in our own way, and we build from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I like this. I didn't know it was connected.
It is.
So this reminds me. I grew up in the Methodist Church in Zimbabwe.
Same.
Yeah, and we had the horn that they...
Kudu horn.
Yes, that they... What is it? Wamanda. Wamanda.
Exactly.
That they used to blow. And I remember how it smells.
Yes. Yes.
So this is quite a memory for me.
Just to stop you there, you remember how it smells.
Yes.
And also how it sounds.
Yes, definitely. Like when I look at it, I can smell it and I can hear the sound that it makes. So I thought it was interesting, like the way you're talking about personal memory and the stake it has within that. I want to then, when we're talking about memory and remembering, right? So there's a way in which this space and this archive is trying to obviously connect with people's personal memories, because within history, there's obviously like official narrative, and then there is people's experiences of history that also, I think what the work here, and I think some of the work that you guys do as well is important. Remembering the people of the Kariba Dam, remembering your personal moments and connections with sound. But there's also an element, I think, in the histories that you're both dealing with, of extreme violence. How are you approaching the violence inherent within the topics you're encountering, because it affects a lot of people. It affected a lot of people, and also your own memories of that pain and violence related to these histories, and using that, confronting it, and still being able to create spaces of care, to be able to still create pieces of art that are intimate, that give room for other people to experience in a very comforting way, or maybe in a unique way that is not necessarily as violent as the histories and as the politics that you're actually highlighting within the work that you're doing.
Can I start and then I throw to Mike?
Yes, of course.
So one of the things that we are aware of in our practice is we do not perpetuate violence or illustrate violence. We are not interested in that. But at the same time, we don't ignore that, the history of violence. And we are also coming from a point that, if I may say, a de-anthropocentric. When we talk about violence, we are talking about ourselves only, violence against people. But sometimes we don't talk about violence against the land or against the nature. And what we are thinking with Nyami Nyami is, okay, Nyami Nyami was angry because his domain was violated. You know, he was fighting against this project because it was a violation. You know, so we are also focusing on this violence against nature. And in many indigenous philosophies, nature is not something to be grabbed. It's part of our lives, you know. And I think also in a world without ice, some of the questions there are around what is our contribution to this violence that is we are now faced with. How are we taking account for that? How are we accountable for that?
The other thing is, you know, I'm a drummer, so a percussionist, a drummer, and the history of my instrument goes back as far as human existence, you know. And so the thing is that drums were used as a form of resistance, but also as a call to war, okay? But also, it's used as a portal to go somewhere else. And it's used in religious ceremonies. And for me, I spent my whole entire life playing drums. And you can transcend your instrument. And so when I play the drums, and even for Nyami Nyami, I'm playing to transcend, okay? It's transcendence of the space, but it's also to welcome everybody into a space and for them to come transcend with me, or to open kind of like a portal, let's say, for people to step into that's not necessarily like a kind of drumming that they might be used to. And so for me, it becomes really important. And I also have participated I've done things with 100 other drummers around like landscapes where we're just participating with the environment. So and the sound that you make is, you know, inside an environment, the environmental sounds are equal to our sounds, right? And so every sound is equal to every other sound in my life. And so I think, you know, we're just trying to create this a welcoming space, but also to transcend that space in order to think about these heavy-duty subjects. So if somebody wants to go into like, they're grieving, even from past, like way past, grieve, you know, there's space in the sound to do that. If it gets people angry, it's okay. There's no one way to feel this kind of vibrations. And I think that what Masimba's talking about is really important, that, you know, we're trying to get people to think about not only what we've done against each other, but what we've done as a human species to the place we live. And that's also important. One other thing, too, because we keep talking about the library here, and the idea of remember and remembering, is that inside the word remember is me. Okay, and so your memories are your own, and they blossom out and inward. And so, for me, we talked about smell. The smell unlocks sound, and sound also unlocks memories too. I mean, our sense of smell is the strongest sense, and that gives us all kinds of things. And for me, sound is memory. And so, like what you said about your childhood, it's the same thing. As a kid, I grew up in Chicago and listened to lots of jazz. So I'm a jazz player, and so like for me, when I think about as a kid smelling that, late at night, I was, had no business being in these jazz clubs as a little kid, but I was there, and so all those experiences build up our previous experiences together as musician and artists. We're here now as a compilation of all those experiences over decades. And so all these little parts and pieces on this trumpet and all the parts and pieces on the drums, they're like this collective experience together. Yeah. And it forms, by the way, a sense of home. So even though I'm 10,000 miles away from home right now, when I sit behind the drums, it's the same. It's the same exact space. So I don't need the time zone or lights on or off. I can just sit in this space, and it feels very familiar, and it's my home base. And so I can play and transcend here for everybody else. So I think that's also cool.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I like that you've moved into a bit of a personal space, but also you're sharing your own individual approaches to art. You have your own, kind of background with sculpture, art. I'd like to hear more about that, like where you started, the kind of art you've created, and how you've gotten to this point, and maybe it's the same with you, because I think you also have mentioned like quite a few elements of your background, but yeah. So just I think maybe talking about the art and the physical aspects of it. From your background, what you've worked on, and then maybe also then describing then in a very practical terms, what this installation Nyami Nyami is going to look like and feel like, flow, all those details.
Right. So I'll leave Mike to describe the installation, but I will also start from the installation itself. Yes. Like the elements in the sculptures have stayed with me for a very long time. I can say when I started making, some of the elements were there. They are still there today. So there is, in my practice, there's a place for objects, not only as things to remember, but also as things that make sound. I was trained as a sculptor, and but from an early age, in my practice, I knew that I was interested in something more. Not just the object, but what does it do? How does it sound like? So the elements in the sculptural elements in the installation, they go way back. And my work makes sound most of the time. And the idea of objects having memory is a very old thing that has been part of my practice for a long time. The issue of sound and memory is pretty recent. It's 10 years, maybe 10 years in my practice, simply because I'm coming from a background where art is disintegrated. You are a sculptor and you are a sculptor for life. But I think the complex problems of the Anthropocene or of our time demand an interdisciplinary approach. So I began thinking interdisciplinary maybe 10, 15 years ago. And so my sculpture has been pushed towards sound, towards performance, towards relationships with the earth, the wind, the atmosphere. So the part of the installation, you will see spears there. You see copper wire. It forms an important part of my life. They are very symbolic, those things, but they are also very functional in the piece, in how they make sound. Yeah, so I'll leave Mike to describe the installation.
Yeah. And I can just say, like from my own personal experience, I grew up and everybody in my house was artists. So they were photographers and sculptors. And so I grew up kind of in the visual side of things, and also just always loved drumming. But the interesting thing is that for me, painter, like applies various amounts of pressure to a canvas, and drummers do the exact same thing. So we have different implements just like a painter or a sculptor, and we use those implements to change the sound or color, or timbre. And so we really do the same thing. And when I realized that I'm literally a painter, but I'm just playing drums. I'm painting with sound, it sounds funny, but we do very similar things. And so I think it's important, like Masimba mentioned, multidisciplinary. It gets overused a lot, but I like to swim in all streams. And so I don't limit myself to just playing only one kind of music. Although, I do a lot of improvisational music, but I'm open for anything, and especially when it comes to kind of visual sounding art. Yeah. So I could talk about the installation a bit. So we have many different elements that we kind of infuse into the work. So Masimba has mentioned his background with sculpture and spears, and he uses musical instruments, and he incorporates those, like you see here, into like his own unique work, and a lot of times that work is sounding. And so Masimba, when he creates his work, he'll activate the space with sound, right? Yeah? And so when I saw his work, I was like, yeah, this is great. This is exactly my same philosophy. And so, but what can I add to his work that makes it look like our work is just completely handshake together? The Zebra Collective as creating work together. And so because one sound in my world is equivalent to any other sound, there's no hierarchy. And so like this drum head on its own is basically just a palette, right? You can paint on this, and I've had painters, I've worked with a painter who painted on drum heads. So this is also a great visual representation. And so I wanted to use drum heads as a way to form a cascade or a river itself. Okay. And so we suspend drum heads, and we perforate them, and the water drips through into reflecting pools. And Masimba said something really cool about stargazing. You don't look up at the stars, you look down into the water. And for me, this blew my mind. So the idea of looking into the pool as a reflection of what's above is a really important element in this particular piece. And so the pools form kind of like the element, the heads and the pools form like this element of reflection. Yeah. And the spears that surround it kind of form the spirit protectors. And so we have these different elements interacting with one another, and water is being poured through them, so there's this kind of flow. And then we in this particular piece, Nyami Nyami shows up in many different ways, but it occurs intermittently, okay? And so to represent Nyami, in the past we've made these snakes with symbols. Really? So we'll take a symbol like this, and we'll put it on its side and stick it in sand. For example, we'll have dozens of symbols. Like a snake. It makes the spine of the snake. Oh, wow. And if we turn it on its side and we put something like this, and then we put something like this, then it forms the scales of the snake. Oh, wow. Okay? And so, but for me, these two things are intimately connected to me for sound, and also my whole existence. But now it becomes an artistic theme and a kind of part of our palette.
Can I ask though, because I can see where Masimba would connect with the concept of Nyami Nyami. How have you entered into that? Have you entered it on a spiritual level, on an artistic level? What does Nyami Nyami mean, or how do you use that concept from your end?
Yeah, this is a great question. Yeah, because it's not part of my culture, you know. But you know, as a drummer, every culture has very specific percussion drums as a part of it, and you know, every drummer's journey through learning is being kind of an ethnomusicologist in the culture that you're playing. We're not trying to take people's music, but we're trying to learn about all these different cultures' music, and especially the drums are fascinating, the patterns and rhythms and things. So for me, I love Cuban music, and there's Santeria music, which is really beautiful, deep, religious music and drumming, and so I try to learn those patterns, but I'm not Santerian, you know. So but I really appreciate the music, and when I learn about something like Nyami Nyami, I try to learn as much as I can. So, for example, I went to the Zambezi River, and I was at Victoria Falls because what's an American going to do? Go to the
Yes,
the biggest, coolest place, and when I was there was a guide. His name was Arthur, and I said, "Hey, Arthur, do you know about Nyami Nyami?" And he looked at me like, "What?" he's like, "How do you know about Nyami Nyami?" So I explained the project, and what he said was so deep. It gave me goosebumps because we were standing next to the river, and he was talking about how the river communicates with everybody. It doesn't matter what language you speak, you know, but it's communicating with you, and it's, you know, and language is not a barrier. And he was talking about Nyami and stargazing, because I asked him about that. And it became like this really great experience for me to connect a little deeper by being in that space,
Yes.
you know, being next to the river, getting the mist, you know.
Yes,
right?
of course.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a blessing, you know. You get the mist put on you. I'm at that space, and I'm not claiming to be an expert at all, because I'm not. But it was an important experience for me to connect to Nyami, you know. And so I think that's how we work. You know, we talk a lot and try to figure out how we're going to deal with the subject matter, and you know, and we're not trying to appropriate or claim anybody's culture per se. But the more you know, the better you're informed. And again, it's like a transcendent experience. You know, I want to communicate with Nyami Nyami. I hope, you know, that comes through, but I'm not claiming to be a part of the culture or part of that, but I want to be in it, you know. Yeah, yeah.
Definitely.